John here with a look at Street Fighter V on the PC. Today we're going to take a closer look at the graphic settings available in this version of the game and see how those settings line up against the PlayStation 4 version. Street Fighter V is one of the first big Unreal Engine 4 releases, and we couldn't wait to spend some time tweaking the game. But what we found inside is rather interesting. If you can't hit 60 frames per second, you basically can't play the game. Any drops below this level of performance and it's slow motion city. The reason for that is that Street Fighter V will draw each and every frame regardless of how long it takes to complete. In terms of the user experience, it's pretty much exactly how the original arcade games functioned, and in a game where individual frames are so critical for high-level play, it definitely makes sense. Frame skipping has the potential to destroy the game. So what does this mean for the player then? Well, basically you need to hit a stable level of performance, and of course that's where the game's settings come in. In addition to the typical resolution options, users are provided with a number of presets ranging from low all the way up to max. One of the most interesting settings here is the resolution scaling slider. Yes, we've seen this before in other games, but the quality of the scaling algorithm here is much more impressive, and it produces unexpectedly clean results. Even with the slider knocked down to 66%, the end results are remarkably smooth. You can, of course, also manually adjust anti-aliasing quality, post-processing, shadow resolution, texture quality, and effects, but there is a surprisingly minor difference between most of these settings, at least until you drop down to the low setting. One of the options that does make a notable difference is anti-aliasing. Unreal Engine 4 natively provides a very nice temporal anti-aliasing solution, and it seems to be in full effect here. If you crank that up to the max setting, the game looks really clean in motion, but if you drop it down to high instead, it actually still looks very similar. It's only at medium that we really start to see any additional aliasing, and this is where the PS4 version sits, it should be noted. The low setting, however, appears to completely disable AA and can produce some rather odd visual artifacts. Another interesting setting here is texture quality. The difference between medium, high, and maximum is pretty difficult to see during gameplay. It primarily impacts the smaller distant details. Yet for low-spec machines, Capcom provides a low setting, which completely destroys the presentation. It basically reduces all textures to a very blurry, low-resolution state that wouldn't be fit for a 20-year-old arcade game, let alone a modern PC title. In comparison, the PS4 doesn't really fit into any of these presets. The general textures slot in around the medium level, but there are a few incidental details scattered around the environments that appear to operate at a lower level of quality, though thankfully it's still well beyond the low setting. Then we have post-processing. Using the high or max setting actually enables a high quality per object and camera based motion blur effect. This really helps accentuate the animation, and it looks really cool in motion. Drop this to medium and motion blur is disabled, just as we see on PlayStation 4. If we go all the way to low, however, we see the remaining post-processing effects such as depth of field blur completely eliminated. Next up is shadow quality. Here, the medium, high, and max settings are all very similar, and during the fight it's almost impossible to tell them apart. It's really only during close-ups that you can see any difference at all. Look at the dithering artifacts here around Yu's model. Dropping to low, however, once again wrecks the shadow quality, leaving us with unfiltered, blocky chunks of shadow. Again, it's clearly meant for very low-spec machines. PS4 seems to rest around the medium setting here as well, though we did note some additional dithering artifacts in certain situations. Lastly, we have the effects setting. And here, we really see no discernible difference between the various settings at all. The density and quality of the effects all seem to be like for like. Modifying this certainly seems to have no real impact on performance, and if we compare this like for like scene, there really just isn't anything to tell the two apart. Very strange indeed. But there are a couple of other things to note about the PC version as well. Settings can only be adjusted from the main menu, but doing so can actually cause some game stability issues. Starting up Street Fighter V at maximum details and playing straight away produced a perfect frame rate on our test rig. Yet once we started modifying values, even dropping them to lower settings, we started to run into issues. We even had the game crash a couple of times. Basically, once you dial in your settings, it seems wise to avoid fiddling with them for the moment. Also, the game's UI uses nearest neighbor scaling. Multiples of 1080p look great, but resolutions that fall outside of this range, such as 1440p, can exhibit minor scaling artifacts. So that's kind of our first take here on the various settings on the PC. The game has a very specific look to it that is only moderately customizable, yet the difference between medium and low settings is absolutely enormous. Yet it's also a game in which your PC absolutely needs to be able to hit the target frame rate. Anything below 60 frames per second and the game becomes virtually unplayable. Anyways, that about wraps up this for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this is John signing off.